Good evening, class. Thank you so much for viewing my video today. My name is Nicole Gallardo, and I will be talking about the issues that minority youth face within society and the criminal justice system. For those of you who are viewing my video, have you ever experienced or witnessed discrimination or racial bias situations? How did it make you feel, and what were your thoughts towards that situation? In the United States and all around the globe, discrimination occurs between every single racial group, especially more within racial minority groups. Racial minority groups are a group of individuals who are singled out by society because of their cultural characteristics and their physical identity. On a daily basis, they experience situations of unequal treatment. Many people are aware of the unequal treatment that occurs within the criminal justice system, especially with adults. However, how many people know that discrimination and racial bias also plays a major role within the juvenile justice system? Minority youth face issues of discrimination in the system, which at times may be difficult because of the child's age. Upon research and learning on minority youth on Color of Justice on Chapter 10, discrimination occurs more often in the juvenile justice system than it does in adult courts. African Americans and Hispanics youth have a disadvantage to be treated equally in criminal offenses. These racial minorities are overrepresented in our society. It is not the youth's problem to be overrepresented. The issue to this is poverty. Minority youths who live in disadvantaged communities and single-parent households will most likely be victimized by a non-stranger or a stranger than a white youth. Not only are they most likely to be victimized, but they also have more likely higher rates of offenses. African American and Hispanics have a higher rate of victimization and offenses because 1, they spend less time at home, 2, they live in disadvantaged communities, 3, they live in single-parent households, and 4, they have a less stable living arrangement. Due to these disadvantages and lack of resources, the minority youths may be led to criminal offenses by influences of peers and the lack of supervision, parent supervision. According to Walker, Spohn, and DeLone, on The Color of Justice, African Americans make up 15% of the youth population, but they make 52.4% of all arrests for youth. This indicates that they have the highest offending rates, but an explained reason would be because of their community disadvantages and because they have high rates of contact with police. Then the role of racial disparities moves in. Racial disparities also becomes an issue for minority youths because criminal justice officials use extra-legal factors on how to proceed a juvenile case. The extra-legal factors soon lead to harsher treatment for minority groups. The reason being is because these extra-legal factors that criminal justice officials use give them the discretion on how they want to proceed the case using characteristics of their age, their gender, and their race. According to Spohn, Walker, and DeLone on Chapter 10, African Americans or racial minorities receive harsher treatment than white youths. An example given is the white youths made 66% of all youths referred to the juvenile courts for drug offenses, but only 44 were detained. African Americans made up 32% of drug offenses referred to the juvenile courts, but 55% were detained. How unfair does that seem? White youths receive less sentencing, less incarceration, and a higher possibility of probation than jail time than racial minorities such as African Americans and Hispanics. Mark Soler, the executive director on Building Block for Youths, mentions that justice by race is no justice at all. He wants equal justice for all. The Building Blocks for Youths program is a national campaign that wants to promote fair and effective justice and has goals to reduce the overrepresentation and harsh treatment to youth of color. Michael Jones, a senior researcher on the National Center on Crime and Delinquency, states that among youth incarcerated with violent crimes, drug offenses, and property crimes, racial minorities are treated more harshly than whites, by receiving more sentencing and incarceration rates longer and larger than white youths, and these are all for the same offenses. If an African American or Hispanic commits the same crime as a white youth, the white youth will more likely receive a lesser sentencing or incarceration, and the racial minority will receive more. Racial minorities are also more likely to go to adult prison. Mark Soler was the executive director of the Building Blocks for Youths that operated from 1998 to 2005. It partnered with the Youth Law Center, American Bar Association, the National Juvenile Law Center, Justice Policy Institute, and Minorities in Law Enforcement. All these programs together did research on the overrepresentation of minority groups and made reports to show federal and state governments to take matter into their own hands and take action for the injustice that minority youths are receiving in the juvenile justice system. This was funded by the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice allowed the Building Blocks for Youth make research and reports on what needed to be done and what changes needed to be made. The Building Blocks for Youth notified Congress on what must be done, but they also made a change to have advocates who can mentor minority groups and their families as well on listening skills, communication skills in schools, help them with school homeworks, and guide them to a better path to not lead to their criminal offenses paths. As mentioned earlier, racial minority groups, some of them are in disadvantaged communities, which sometimes can lead to their criminal offenses because of the influence that they have. All this information was found on Chapter 10, and more research done by the Building Blocks on Youth online. Chapter 10 discussed a lot of the rates on how many higher rates racial minorities have than whites, but also how many disadvantages they have than white individuals. The Building Blocks for children, for youths, was also mentioned on Chapter 10, which I wanted to learn more about and made more research on. A conclusion for all the research I made is the juvenile justice system needs to have more programs that can help the juvenile kids to not be committing these offenses. Sending them to prison is not going to be the solution. When there is a problem, there must be a solution, and I believe that sending them to prison is not going to make things better. We're only sending young kids going to jail and not having the second opportunity to change their life around and make a difference as well. Thank you so much for viewing my video. I really appreciate it. I didn't think I'd make the 9-10 minutes. Have a great night. Thank you.